Ladies and gentlemen, if I please can ask you to take your seats, and I believe we can slowly start the event. Thank you very much all for coming. Now, if I may, please give the floor to Director of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, Andris Sprūts.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dear friends, dear colleagues, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Andris Sprūts. I'm Director of the Institute of International Affairs, and I'm also one of the quite a number of editors of this book. So I think all of us have some sort of ownership of this book, be it authors, be it editors. I think today it's always a pleasant event when you have a book, when you come out with a book, when you can see the product of it. So of your research, this is a pleasant event. I think the second one is that it is societal security, so it is an important subject in many ways. There has been also a deliberate attempt today by Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump to overshadow this event, but I think we've been quite successful and at least still having some attention and discussing it, and I hope the discussion will continue. Societal security for us, for the authors, for the project launchers has been an important issue. We speak about resilience. We speak about also comparative perspective of resilience in the Baltic region, how resilience, societal security is being put in traditional national security discourse and narrative. We are becoming all, you can say, stakeholders when we discuss security. And I think this is sort of one of the messages of this book as well. And as I said, this comparative perspective is important when we can compare different perspectives in the Baltic Sea region, when we can also look at the best practices, when we can see so different models of how we approach societal security, how we try to incorporate in our own national security agenda. With this, I stop my own remarks on societal security, on importance of it. I think the important for me is also to say thank you, the words of appreciation to our partners. It has been supported by Nordic Council of Ministers, so we are very appreciative to the Nordic Council of Ministers for supporting this beneath the traditional security discussion and research. We are also grateful to our partners, the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, also the Center for International Regional Policy from St. Petersburg. So it has been once more a multinational effort. And of course, we are also grateful to our authors for joining from very beginning, to having this discussion already last August in Helsinki. Now we continue in Riga, and I believe that it must be continued beyond Riga and beyond, of course, 12th of June this year. So I believe that it is an important subject in becoming increasingly relevant for all of us. Should I say all the words of appreciation? Elizabeth, did I miss something? Yes, of course. Also, some authors within to fill the more people, so also the authors were implanted within the room. But of course, also I must say thank you to Elizabeth for leading this project, also for Diana for being at the beginning of this project. So I think there is a good legacy in this regard as well. With it, thank you so much. So enjoy the discussion, and I am happy to give the floor to Boris, one of our partners. Boris, please.
Thank you very much, Andris. At first, I would like to welcome dear colleagues, friends, partners, and guests. On behalf of the Center for International and Regional Policy from St. Petersburg, as a partner of this project, I much appreciate the initiative and efforts of Latvian Institute of International Affairs and especially Andris Sprūts for this project implementation and fulfillment. I suppose that's an extremely urgent topic to discuss that's united all of us around the Baltic Sea region, because we face this common challenges and common problems regarding societal security and how our societies are prepared to be resilient to these new challenges regarding the migration flows, climate change, food security, cyber security. So we try to identify these all topics and hot issues, and to trace how all of us, each country, to contribute to cope with these problems. Honestly, we should, from the Russian side, should confirm and recognize that our Nordic partners, Nordic neighbors are more prepared than we are, but otherwise we would like to also contribute our vision and our efforts to this problematic, because we also have awareness about these important issues, societal security, and how we should to manage it in the future. So I'm very grateful to the team of Latvian Institute of International Affairs and all authors who contributed to this book. I would like to listen to your vision and to share this vision with our guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andris and Boris. Indeed, allow me to reiterate the sincere thankfulness that we share towards the Nordic Council of Ministers, as well as the Center for International and Regional Policy Studies and the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Also, I think I should mention Dr. Mika Autola, who was unfortunately unable to join us today, but contributed a great deal to the success of the project. Now, thank you very much all for joining on this rather gloomy Tuesday afternoon, and hopefully this is also marks a period of a rather hectic days in the office before a well-deserved holiday. So the subject matter of the discussion, societal security, I believe is underrepresented in the academic and policy-making circles in Latvia. If we open the table of contents of the book, we can see that we have opted for a rather extended version of the Baltic Sea region, also including partners from Iceland, Belarus, Russia, as well as the Nordic states, the Baltic states, and Poland. To me, it seems that societal security is a topic which brings interest in all the countries of the region because it is somewhat able to overcome the geopolitical caveat that is often connotated with terms hard and soft security and also other terms that relate to it. Coming back to 1991, Barry Buzan, in his book People, States and Fear, defined societal security as one of the 5 sectors of security in a, I believe, much voice and a much echoed definition. The sustainability within acceptable conditions for evolution of traditional patterns of language, culture, religion, ethnicity, and customs. Now, I should know this definition by heart by now. Whereas I will leave the discussion on the very definition and interpretation thereof in each of the respective states up to the authors. I would perhaps like to say or to conceptualize the debate according to how we try to structure the conclusions of the book. Firstly, I believe societal security could be approached as an agenda. Boris already mentioned a couple of topicalities or issues that relate to societal security. Firstly, the territorial or physical integrity and security of a state. Now, across the Baltic Sea region, we see very different approaches to this. We have Iceland, which feels rather safe and does not see the potential of a territorial attack. Therefore, it is concerned with physical security and the security of infrastructure. And then, of course, we have the Baltic states and Finland, which represent a rather different approach to the very term national security. There is, of course, demographic security, which relates and is particularly topical in the context of the migratory crisis, environmental security, information and cybersecurity, as well as spiritual and mentality and the security of a certain mentality. And perhaps the last point is the one that seems to relate to the definition of Buzan, relating to identity the most. The second approach, which was indeed, that came to my mind when I was reading Christina Sick's contribution, was also related to societal security as a way of governing a state. Societal security, especially in the Nordic states, namely Finland, Sweden, and Norway, is approached through the doctrine of total defense. These countries, being the pioneers of total defense, indeed have merged or used different elements of human security as well as emergency preparedness to govern the security sector and also engage the civil society and citizens into ensuring the emergency preparedness of the state in case of any emergency arising from within or outside the state. You also have more vertical ways of governing societal security and security as such, which are more characteristical to the three Baltic states and Poland. However, these countries do see themselves as a part, or sort of interpret themselves as a part of a globalized, interconnected world, and therefore already start to embrace the notion of resilience, in particular when it comes to information and cyber challenges. Now, I believe that Alexander Sergunin will provide a very interesting overview of the Russian perspective. However, I would also like to raise a point which was contributed by Arseny Savitsky, from Belarus, who is currently not present here. His interpretation of the Belarusian approach to security was that of total security, where, as a matter of fact, the state itself substitutes for this tissue or this identity tissue which would otherwise bring the society together. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists today, starting with Diana Potemkina, who is indeed a PhD fellow affiliated with the United Nations University Institute, as well as the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, now, pardon my Flemish, and the Ghent University. She was indeed also the mother of the project, so definitely credits for that. Christina Sick, who is currently the CEO and strategic advisor at the defense and crisis consulting firm Straterno AB from Sweden. She, of course, has a very fundamental background on Swedish civilian and military defense, and this is something that she's going to present today. Gedimina Svitkus, who is currently the professor and the head of the European Studies Department and in the Institute of International Relations and Political Science in the Vilnius University. And Professor Alexander Sergunin, who is currently a professor at St. Petersburg State University. Now, thank you very much for joining, and I leave the floor to you. Perhaps we can start with Diana, as she will have to leave a bit early.
Yeah, I will just pull up my very friendly notes, which are not present on the laptop. So speaking about societal security, is it on? No, it's still on. Like, I will try to speak a bit louder. So, speaking about societal security, in Latvia, I was actually very enthusiastic about the whole concept and its application to the Latvian case. But when I started, I realized that actually it's a very daunting task, because the first problem is in Latvian language there is no such concept as societal security. It's being translated sometimes as sabiedrības drošība, but this is not quite the same. It's more about police operations. So the first one was that translation issue, and the second one and related challenge when we talk about societal security in Latvia is that also due to absence of a dedicated concept, it's kind of difficult to distinguish societal security from other types of security. So either it's like we narrow it down and it's almost not mentioned at all in the policy documents, or it becomes a catch-all term. But I tried to narrow it down and identify the three main societal security challenges which are relevant in the Latvian context. So the task for today's panel was also to compare how the local understanding of societal security relates to the broader regional debate. What I can say about Latvia is that actually the challenges are identified in a rather comprehensive manner. And this is similar to what happens elsewhere in the region. But just the balance, the challenges which we highlight, and also the solutions that we use here in Latvia are somewhat different. So in Latvia, we still have quite prevalent focus on traditional security, which is military security and security of the territorial state. At the same time, we also have more postmodern vision emerging. And this means that we focus more on the individual level, individual security, and we focus more on the level of the society and the nation. And also, if we recall the constitution of the Latvia, which dates back to 1918, the constitution says that the state of Latvia actually has been established on the basis of the will of the Latvian nation and in order to guarantee its existence and development. So these, how to say, the major role of society in the nation, in the Latvian context, it dates back to the beginnings of the Latvian state. But nonetheless, in the real debate, especially now with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, with the unpredictable neighbor, we still have frequently the prevalence of the more military and more territorial notion. So the three main societal security narratives, which I identified in the Latvian context, are interethnic relations, media environment, and economic security. The first ones are, I believe, more prominent, more developed, and also related between themselves. In the interethnic relations, just to sketch very briefly what we speak about, we have two major approaches, two major debates. So whether we guarantee the security best on the basis of integration through Latvian language and through Latvian culture, or do we choose a more cosmopolitan approach? And to some extent, this also relates to the debate of how do we develop the relations with Russia. And on this issue, there is no consensus on either the definition of the challenge or the proposed solutions. Speaking about the media environment, so Latvia has become a European leader in search of ways to counter Russian propaganda, and I understand that today actually some of you may be coming from another event on this topic, or this event still goes on in parallel. Yeah, so Riga is a major hub for debate. Solutions, basically everybody agrees that this is a challenge, but again, there is no total compromise on the solutions. Some say it should be improving communication, strengthening the international media environment, promoting media literacy. Some say that we should also finance public media in the Russian language. Others believe that this is not the best course. And lastly, the economic security is also very relevant, not only on the individual level, but also on the societal level, because we have socio-economic disparity within the society, horizontally, and also across regions. And also economic issues are something that Russia uses a lot in its propaganda, so there is a long-standing Russian strategy to portray Latvia as a failed state economically. And social inequality is also mentioned in the 2016 defense concept, for instance. Of course, there have been some changes since this article has been written, so we continue the debate about Istanbul Convention, which can also be related to societal security. Now we have created the new group for securing elections against disinformation, which has been announced just this week. But so, yes, to come back to the regional level, basically, these challenges very much relate to the challenges elsewhere in the region that Boris Kuznetsov has identified in his chapter. And also, we see not only similarities with the other post-communist societies, but also similarities with the Nordic societies, because, for instance, migration, gender inequalities, social inclusion, exclusion debate, climate change are becoming increasingly important in the Latvian context. And remedies, which we find here, also are generally the same as elsewhere in the Baltic Sea region, although there is one major aspect which Boris has not, I think, mentioned in his article, which is nation building. So we pay a lot of attention to nation building and identity building. Some problems maybe lie in the fact that in Latvia, still societal security is not very well conceptualized and it's not very well coordinated on the state level. So we have some separate ministries. We have the Ministry of Culture, also in the fight against disinformation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense play a major role. What Latvia might benefit from is a coordination under the Prime Minister. We might benefit from a dedicated societal security strategy, and also because one of the topics of this book is interaction between governmental and non-governmental actors, we see that foreign policy think tanks deal a lot with societal security challenges, but this issue might also benefit from maybe less externalized and more internal debate on how we deal with all these different dimensions, including gender, environment, and so on. And I think that I can finish here.
Thank you very much, Diana. Perhaps we can move on to Christina, if you are ready. Also, for the questions, I think we can leave them to the end, but please do.
Thank you. And thank you very much for this invitation to visit Riga. It's my first time here. And thank you for inviting me to join this project. It's been very interesting to spend some time studying the Swedish perspective. Even if I live in it daily, sometimes you need the helicopter view and some moments for reflection. So I haven't had the opportunity to read all the other chapters, but looking at the table of contents, I think you can see a few red threads going through, and I find that very interesting. And I'm going to come back to what you told me over lunch later. So the title of the Swedish chapter is The Battle of the Narrative. Basically, in Sweden right now, we're reviving the total defense concept that we had over the 1900s. We developed the total defense due to the fact that we saw a risk or possibility of a total war, so to speak, during the Cold War. And once the Berlin Wall was no more and the Soviet Union was no more, we kind of entered as the whole of society into what we sometimes refer to as the eternal peace, which we recently had a brutal awakening from, should I say. So after the wall fell, we started developing the peacetime crisis emergency management. And that was quite bottom up in comparison to the quite top-down processes of the total defense. I would say the society engagement was narrowed rather than broadened. So during the total defense era, even though we had a quite specific threat focus, all of society was present. So everyone had a role. The civilian sector, the private sector, the military, of course. So I would say even social security, even if it was probably not present as a concept during the 1900s, I would say even the total defense concept had certainly its roots in thoughts of resilience. And that kept on going through the emergency preparedness and crisis management, peacetime crisis management in the 90s and the 2000s. Another development, I would say, is the human security perspective. We have a government that calls itself a feminist government. I would definitely say that this has its roots in the human security perspective. And the UN perspectives, of course, which is also very debated, should I say. And we're seeing at this point something of a battle between all these narratives. And I'm kind of, I think I heard something to the effect of that in your presentation, Diana. What topics are we to securitize? Are we talking about natural disasters, accidents? Are we talking about armed attack, terrorism? So there's a battle going on between these narratives at this point. But the flashlight that armed attack was during the Cold War era has been turned off. And we're not so blinded by this one threat anymore. And so we're beginning to see this very varied environment, security environment that we are facing. Hybrid warfare. I mean, I'm wondering, do we perceive hybrid threats because we have a broadened societal security perspective, or do we get a broadened societal security perspective due to hybrid threats? I'm not sure. They're probably feeding each other. But this is very apparent in the Swedish debate right now. And we have just recently sent out, and I think it was one of the Baltic states too, recently sent out a brochure named If Crisis or War Comes, It's sent out by the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency just this past month to all homes in Sweden that states clearly that, well, if there's a crisis in peacetime or an armed attack, this and this should happen, and this is how you should prepare, et cetera, et cetera. And this reaching the general public has been quite the shock for some Swedes, I think, but very, very, I think the fact that we used to have a brochure called If War Comes, now it's If Crisis or War Comes, and I think this merge is definitely very apparent in Sweden. I remember when I was here in August, there was someone who said maybe resilience could be the binding concept when we talk about social security, and I say yes. I think theoretically resilience is a very useful concept, although I would say it's going to be difficult to govern a nation state with policy that state all hazard resilience. It's going to be difficult. I mean, we need policy that provide ability to prioritize limited resources also in Sweden, even if we're a fairly rich country, etc. We cannot deal capability on the floor throughout the entire threat scale. So what we need today, I think, is to really bring out a social security concept that engage all these three narratives and don't have them continue to run parallel. And we have a national security strategy already in place, but I think that needs to be developed and broadened and deepened. And if I could just mention, finishing off, one major issue I think that we need to take into consideration, not just in Sweden, but in general when we talk about social security, is public-private partnerships. So public-private partnerships need to be strengthened if we want a modern social security real capability development. And I think I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Just to give a brief remark, I think the question you asked, which topics are we to secularize, is actually one which is very pertinent to the rest of Europe and not only to the Baltic Sea region, especially in the wake of the wave of populism. It's not even a wake anymore. I think it's more of a reality. Please, Gediminas, if we can maybe have your perspective.
Okay, thank you. I think I don't need that. Professor, to speak loud. It's online, okay. Now I feel like singer. First of all, I would like to thank Andris, Diana, and Elisabetta for invitation and opportunity to work, and Boris, of course, to work in this project and to think about this quite strange concept of societal security. In fact, it was a challenge because in Lithuanian case it's the same like in Latvian. We simply don't have this word. When I look through the publications, I found either it's a public security, that means actually work of police, or it's a social security, that's basically about pensions. But there is no concept in Lithuanian language which is talking about society as a self-sustainable actor, which is really concerned about its own security. This concept actually assumes that we have a kind of deconstruction. We have separation, state and society. State is something different from society. And I think different from Western Europe, I think in the Baltic states, this concept is very difficult to differentiate, because basically Baltic states, Baltic nations didn't live so long as independent nations, and independent statehood, possibility to restore independence in 90s, was a really huge event, and people actually put an equal mark between state and society, between independence of state equals security of society. There is no difference. And then in this discourse, it's really difficult to include something different about security of society, which might be something different from state security, but at the same time even could be in contradiction with state security. Sometimes we could have situations when societal security contradicts for state security. Some state policies might be doing damage for society security, and sometimes perhaps wishes and the willingness of people of society might contradict with tasks and objectives of state. So the concept was confusing, and I tried to make a small investigation how these concepts could be interrelated, and picked up, of course, Buzan's approach, and also I picked up Ole Weber approach. It's another great star of Copenhagen Peace Research School, and as you know, Ole Weber, he proposed a bit different approach to societal security. He proposed that when we are talking about these things, we could talk about them in parallel. We could combine state security and societal security. We could have two different discourses, and we could have two different ways of solution of this problem. If we have state security, usually state security, national security takes care about sovereignty. When we are talking about societal security, it takes care about threats for identity, or the final point, the upper point could be total depopulation, disappearance of society. And in that case, if society is disappearing state as well. So, and afterwards I turned to Lithuanian case and looked what kind of thinking and what kind of narratives we have in Lithuania. And what I discovered just recently in 2017, last year, the new national security concept was adopted, and I investigated this concept and also talked with people who were involved in preparation of this concept. And I discovered that all these people, thinking of these people is totally they are doing that in very, very traditional way. Their approach is that first of all we need to take care about sovereignty, take care about military threats, take care about threats for political system, economic threats, and at the end, of course, also we need to take care about threats for societal security. But they are not very much prioritized in comparison with these traditional approaches. And when I looked at people who are dealing with national security on state level, in state institutions, I discovered they don't even think very much about societal security as a separate and a very important or outstanding issue. But on the other hand, also I discovered that discourse on societal security and thinking about societal security, narratives about societal security is present in Lithuania, especially in academic community. Research Council funded several projects actually which were targeted to research and development of special societal security, about social challenges for societal security, about identity situation in Lithuania. And these people, academics, they did a lot of research, published a lot of articles, monographs, and one of main findings of all this research was that basically some philosophers are saying that what happened in the Baltic states, and particularly in Lithuania, that we re-established state, but state as administrative unit. We are administrating, and sometimes very effectively, sometimes not very effectively. But actually, we are not taking care too much about society, about condition of society. Are these people really satisfied? And why these questions arise? Because in Lithuania we really have very difficult societal problems. I think that according to the European Commission, in Lithuania we have the highest rate of emigration from Lithuania. And we started our independence with 3.5 million people, and now in Lithuania we have only 2.9 million. It's huge. Also, according to the European Commission, the social exclusion, degree of social exclusion in Lithuania is very high. Very liberal economic reforms brought quite big differentiation in society, and a lot of people just simply are not involved. But these two discourses, state security, sovereignty security, and societal security, are still separated. When I looked at the preparation of national security concept, how it was prepared, actually it was prepared only by civil servants, by advisors, basically people around Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, President's Office, but there was no academic people included in that, and there was not even dialogue, and nobody really felt discomfort about that from state officials' side, because they just didn't come this to their minds that societal security could be represented in a bit different way. So this is a situation in Lithuania, and concluding remark is just this project brought for me to my head the idea that if we have two options, either we are taking care about state or we are taking care about society, and actually we are in a situation that sometimes we have competition, state and national security concepts are basically written from state position, and let's try or imagine small experiment that we are changing places between these two concepts and putting forward not state security but societal security, and subordinate state security, sovereignty to societal security. What kind of picture we could see in that case? And we could notice that sometimes already, even in our experience, also happened the situations that on behalf of society, state decided to reduce its sovereignty. What was the joining the European Union? It was a reduction of a kind of making less sovereignty, but why? On behalf of society. And this opens avenues for perhaps different thinking about relations of this concept. So, thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Gediminas. Now, I think that moving from Christina to Gediminas really showed how diverse the approaches to societal security are and how difficult it actually is to come up with any kind of agenda points for a regional approach to the issue. Now, if we may, please continue with Alexander Sergunin.
Yeah, thank you very much, organizers, for the invitation to this project. It was a great one and really intellectually challenging. I agree with Gediminas that it was really very useful and very interesting experiment. Could have it in the next slide. In contrast with my chapter, actually, the focus of my presentation is much narrower. I'd like only to describe the four major international relations paradigms in Russia, and skipping the sections of my chapter which are devoted to things like, for example, main stakeholders, governmental, non-governmental levels, and also the sources of regional expertise. So, could you have the next slide? Actually, I tried to analyze this issue from two different points of view. The first one is, or levels, the first level is official one, the formal one, which is represented by national security documents of Russia. And the second level is informal, unofficial, academic or expert discourse. As far as the official level is concerned, I would say that the very notion, the very concept of societal security is completely missing from these documents. We even have problems with the translation of this English expression, societal security, to the Russian language. For example, some people, they prefer to translate it as общественная безопасность, which literally in English, social or public security. I guess the same like in other languages in the Baltic Sea region. And a relatively small group, they prefer to translate it as the безопасность общества or security of the society, which is more or less close to the Copenhagen School of International Relations, the original one, and they try to develop their views along these lines. The next slide, please. As I mentioned, you cannot find the concept in the Russian official documents. If you look at Russian national security documents ranging, let's say, from the Russian Law of National Security of 1992 to the most recent one, the Russian National Security Strategy, approved by President Putin in late 2015, we can only find mentioning some kind of soft security problematic rather than human or societal security concepts. And the Russian national security documents, they identified three levels: individual security, social security or public security, and state security. And only actually the state security level is the most realistic one. Individual level and social security is just only, quite hypothetical, quite theoretical concepts which are not addressed in a practical sense by the real governmental policies. Could we have the next slide? But if you look at to the different works produced by Russian scholars and experts, you can see some traces of state security concept or some close notions to this concept. As might you know, that the neorealist paradigm is the most influential one in Russia. It's the dominant paradigm, which also affects not only Russian national security thinking, but also Russian national security doctrines. So the neorealists, they prefer to identify as the state documents three levels: individual, social security, and state security. And under the social security or public security, they understand spheres or fields which address such threats or challenges as socio-economic disparities, poverty, low living standards, poor social security system, poor health system, street violence and crime, corruption, and that kind of social problems, which are actually characteristic to many post-socialist, post-Soviet societies in many countries. So it's quite traditional understanding of it. The next slide, please. The Russian neoliberalism is much more sophisticated in terms of interpreting societal security problematic. There are several sub-schools in this paradigm. One of these schools, maybe it's a dominant sub-school, which prefers to interpret the concept of societal security in legalistic terms, and trying to connect this concept to the human rights problematic. And for that reason, this sub-school prefers to focus on things like minority rights, ethnic minority rights, sexual minority rights, everything which is related to minorities. And from that point of view, the neoliberals are quite critical both about Russian government and policies, but also what, for example, the Baltic states are doing in this sphere. Because the Russian neoliberals, they believe that none of the governments in the region, maybe with the exception of Nordic countries or Germany, they really have correct policies in this field. And the rights of national minorities, sexual minorities, and the rest are not respected to the full extent. Then also we have another neoliberal sub-school which prefers a broader understanding of societal security, and they try to equalize this concept with the human security concept. And in that sense, they are close to the definition of human security produced by the United Nations, especially the UN Development Program Human Development Report of 1994, which distinguishes between 7 aspects or 7 dimensions of human security. And they simply use the concept of societal security and human security as interchangeable concepts. Then we have the Russian paradigm of globalism. Just to cut it briefly, shortly, the Russian globalists, they prefer to interpret societal security as a synonym of sustainable development. And again, in that sense, they drew heavily upon the United Nations documents, for example, UN Sustainable Development Goals up to 2030, and they try to interpret all societal security problematic close to that understanding. Then also we have some sub-schools within the 4th IR paradigm, which is postpositivism. The Russian postpositivism started from the so-called postmodernism, which is the most radical school, and it's the most critical school. Actually, postmodernists, they prefer to criticize other paradigms, but didn't produce any new or own concept. I believe that the next generation of post-positivism, which is social constructivism, is much more interesting and much more creative sub-school, which tries to see the societal security concept through the prism of identity. Gediminas already mentioned that kind of approach. And I think it's a quite promising approach. I think that other paradigms, they should also use some ideas, some principles and approaches from this paradigm as well. Could you just list the slides till the last one? Okay. So let me move to the conclusions. In my chapter, actually, I try to also analyze why the concept of societal security is not embedded into the Russian security discourse, what kind of barriers or impediments we have in Russia, intellectual, historical, ideological, and etc. But my general conclusion are quite optimistic. Look at the bright side of Russian security discourse. I would say that societal security, not maybe concept, but problematic, is slowly, gradually is being embedded in a Russian security discourse. And sooner or later, I think that the Russian national security thinking will bring this problematic to the full extent. Thank you.
Fantastic, Mr. Zhugunin, thank you very much. Now I think you can see how the chapters complement each other, and I think once again that in no other relation but the one with, say, Europe and Russia, the clarity of definitions is as important, so really thank you for the contribution and the very thorough academic analysis. Now, if I may perhaps move to the part on questions and answers, my request to you would perhaps be to ask all the questions addressed to Mrs. Potomkina first, She will have to leave a bit earlier. Otherwise, the floor is yours. Do not hesitate. And already I can see Carlos Bukowskis, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentations. I have two questions. The first, and in this case, goes to well, both mothers of the project, if I may say so, using Elizabeth's term. It's actually on the concept. Diana, at one point you mentioned that the societal security concept as such doesn't have a Latvian analog in this case. There is a concept which was actually popularized a few years ago, something like 10 years ago. It's human security. How does the human security, so my question is, how does the human security aspect, concept, go together with the societal security? What are the differences? What are the things? The second question is actually to the whole panel, if I may, because you were, in your presentations, you were indicating very many aspects that are part of the societal security problematics. So my question is, when you were researching your own respective countries, you probably had something in mind, which issues, which problems, which security threats you will find. So my question is, which ones didn't you find, which you expected to find? Thank you.
Any more questions? Otto, please.
Thank you. I'm Otto Tabons from the Baltic Security Strategy Project, and I would have two questions. First to Ms. Sik. How has the Swedish discourse on societal security changed in view of changes in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine and Russia and NATO in the last 4 years? And also a question to Mr. Sergunin. What would be the way how you would analyze the Russian perspective on the discourse of societal security in the Baltic states? Thank you.
Another question perhaps already? Okay, maybe can we start with Diana? Human security and societal security.
Yes, human security and societal security, excellent question. Human security is more about the individual level. So it is about individual socioeconomic well-being, about non-discrimination at the individual level, about how every individual citizen lives, feels in a certain country. So I would say that they're closely related, of course, because if we have very high level of human security, then we have less problems with at least some aspects of societal security. For instance, if we have uniform socioeconomic well-being, it means that we have no stratification, or stratification is not so important. That means that we don't have certain pockets and strata emerging in the society which are somehow separated from the rest of society and create some sort of tension. But overall, societal security is much broader than that, because societal security is actually how society as a whole takes shape and functions and maintains its identity. So this common identity component is crucial here. And this is why I also believe my colleagues mentioned social constructivism so well suited for analyzing this concept, because, for instance, what we see here in Latvia, the major societal security debates actually relate to the national identity. They relate to the inter-ethnic relations, and this relates to how we see the Latvian state, the purpose of the Latvian state, whom we see as belonging to the Latvian nation or not belonging to the Latvian nation, what we understand with the Latvian nation. And for instance, if we speak about, gender non-discrimination, of course, this is individual issue, this is human security issue, but this is also societal issue, because in the society we have this debate about which norms, for instance, are okay or not okay for us as a society, and whether we discriminate or not discriminate against certain society groups. So yeah, this is about human security and societal security.
If If I can just shortly add that I think the other difference between human security and societal security is that, of course, societal security can prepare the population for an emergency, but as, for instance, eliminated in the Danish contribution, welfare state can also be perceived as a perpetual mechanism of societal security, which deals with a society as a whole and trying sort of to patch and stitch all the cracks in order to ensure a consistent and cohesive identity. But instead of emergency preparedness mechanisms using the welfare state for that. The second question, is there anybody who would like to take it? Maybe Diana, you have something to, or?
Thank you, Carlis, for your interesting question. What we expected and what we didn't find. Actually, in my case, I was expecting, because I investigating how national security strategy in Lithuania was elaborated and prepared, kind of process tracing analysis. And what I expected that it will be common effort of the whole nation, of all interested parts, of all stakeholders in that process, full involvement. And what I discovered that it happened as a kind of bureaucratic exercise without real participation of civil society, unfortunately. And taking into account that several years ago in Lithuania we have huge research program, challenges for social security. And I read the report, final report of this program, which involved dozens of projects. And the main conclusion of this report was not to how make influence to society, to thinking about national security, but that this research opened new avenues for new research. That was quite a bit unexpected thing for me, because two separate worlds are living and two separate thinkings about security existing, and to a certain extent they not meeting each other. Of course, in official national security strategy, all societal threats and necessity to deal with them are included, but all of them are still in subordinated way. And not, because it's now very fashionable to talk about social exclusion, we will include, that's a good thing, but nothing else is really going on. That was a thing which I didn't expect it, to find.
Yeah, I've got two questions. The first one, which was a general one. I didn't found something really new when I tried to study the Russian discourse on societal security, because simply it's missing, mostly, especially at the official level. On the other hand, actually, it happened to be that I was present at the creation of the very concept, because I spent quite a while in the Nordic Peace Research Institutes, including the Copenhagen Peace Research Institute, where this concept was born, I mean, societal security. Barry Buzan was my mentor in the early 90s, and Ule Werber was my neighbor. I mean, his office was just next door to mine, and he tested on me not only societal security concept, but also securitization, desecuritization concept, and other things. So that sense, I was just a part of this process myself. And I didn't expect that this concept will easily be embedded in Russian foreign policy and security thinking. But also, I would say that your question about what is different and what is in common between societal and human security concepts. I mean, I guess the explanation is historical. Societal security was, as I mentioned, born in the Copenhagen Peace Research Institute to identify threats and challenges to the society, as a society, identical, vital threats and challenges. Later, in post-Copenhagen school research, there was different interpretation of this concept. But then the human security concept was born within the United Nations. which is, had an ambition to become, embrace all dimensions of security. So, I mean, currently human security is seen, at least within the United Nations framework, as some kind of umbrella concept for the whole security discourse. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that everyone agrees with that. For example, I took part in another project on human security in the Arctic region, in the Barents region and Arctic region, which was run by the University of Lapland. It was finished last year. And they tend to interpret societal security and human security as the same. They use the interchangeably, and they identify the 7 aspects. And human security, they use this concept when they try to make emphasis on personal security, individual security, while societal security they use when they have some kind of social, public threats or challenges. And the second question, just briefly, the problem is that the Baltic states, the Baltic studies in Russia are underdeveloped. I mean, you just can find very few experts on the Baltic states, especially in the field of international relations and security studies. And the Russian Baltic discourse is dominated by a lot of stereotypes and prejudices about these threats to national minorities, Russophobia, that kind of stuff. And you can find only very few researchers in St. Petersburg, in Kaliningrad, in Petrozavodsk, in Moscow, who deal seriously with that kind of issues. So I cannot boast that we have a more or less well-developed discourse on the Baltic societal security issues.
Thank you very much, Christina. So the question on the discourse of societal security and its changes in the light of the conflict in eastern Ukraine.
I mean, has the discourse changed? Yes, certainly it has. I mean, beginning in 2008, the aggression against Georgia, and then a few years later on the Ukraine, certainly this has affected the Swedish policy and the discourse on societal security, and I would say this is definitely the emergence of the new total defense has its roots in those aggressions, because we knew that Russia had capability. We didn't know maybe that they had a will to use it. And as most people that had worked in with the military or in defense, we know when there's capability and will at the same time, we have a problem. And especially so if we have a deteriorating security environment in general. So yes, it has changed the discourse. I mean, and with the startup again now with defense planning, I would say that affects also societal security. It's not only a military matter. So this forces actors to think broadly about security in general due to hybrid threats and gray zone areas. I mean, and Sweden now has closer relations to the United States and to the NATO. Even if we're not a member, we have a very close partnership. And I would also say that even, I mean, if this flashlight of armed attack is now back on, we can still see the other security threats dealing, I mean, related to social security matters. The problem we have is how do we prioritize our resources to deal with all of these various threats. And dealing, I mean, once working in total defense again, I would say it's a broader engagement in society than we have seen during the peacetime crisis emergency and emergency preparedness time over the past 20 years. It's been narrowed. And with the awakening of total defense, it's broadened again, which also has its roots in societal security perspectives.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we'll probably have to let Diana go, so thank you very much for coming. Now, secondly, I think what struck me the most, Mr. Sergunian, was the fact that the lack of mutual expertise is to my understanding, perhaps doesn't only apply to Russia vis-a-vis the Baltic states, but perhaps is present within the region, because for me and other experts, I believe that reading this book is going to be a very, let's say, also a period of revelations where many new aspects of societal security come across. Now, perhaps, is there another question? That please introduce yourself, if you may.
Thank you. I'm from Germany, and I wanted to ask if the rise of populism and populistic parties maybe changed the concept of social security, and maybe is a reason why we think of threats from society within.
Maybe another question already? If I then, in that case, perhaps may abuse my position as a moderator and ask, take into account the very diverse approaches to societal security, at least the ones that have been already presented here today. We know that there's the Council of Ministers of the Baltic States, for instance, that serve or tackle certain issues that relate to societal security, for instance, environment or demographics, or, well, most notably probably environment, which relates to societal security. But how do you think this issue should be introduced on a European level? And could the EU serve as an instrument to work towards societal security, or common approach to societal security? The floor is yours.
$1 million question concerning what the EU should do on EU level for societal security. I'm not sure that this issue should be addressed on EU level, in fact, because EU is a collection of societies, and these societies are different and have different challenges, and I'm not sure that the EU would be able to provide common approach to this problem. But what EU could do, I could say from my own research, I discovered that European Commission, by doing European semester, by doing every year report of economic and social condition of member states, in fact, could be an external player in indicating for societies and for member states what are the problems and where should attention to be paid to the issues. And in Lithuania case, it was obvious. But on the other hand, I also saw that the European Commission was listened politely, but not all advice was taken for granted. But at least I see an opportunity. But in general, I'm, as far as I know, there was an attempt to develop kind of social policy, social charts on the EU level, but they are not really working. And also I would like to address your question about concerning populism. I think that populism is exactly very clear litmus test. If societies are really not taking care, governments are not taking care about societal security, they are getting populism, they are getting political parties who are speculating on these problems, and that means that we are not addressing actually societal security in proper way. And finally we are getting to populism. Everybody knows that nobody likes austerity, but from economic point of view, austerity is simply necessary, but when you have austerity, you have immediately populism, and this is a clear connection.
A very brief comment about European Union roles and so on. I think that's not only European Union, but also other regional, sub-regional organizations or institutions. They try to bring societal security problematic onto the agenda. For example, if we recall the European Union's the Baltic Sea region strategy of 2009, which was several times updated, they have clearly the whole block on the societal security problematic. Also, if you look at the agenda of the Council of the Baltic Sea States, Almost each presidency has that kind of problems or issues on the agenda, even including Russia, which, I mean, Russia didn't use the very term, but when we look at its presidency in 2012 and 13, we can see that clearly there is a special block on societal security problems. Also some other sub-regional organizations, such as, for example, the Helsinki Commission or the Baltic Sea Union, or there's a special organization which unites sub-regional, sub-national actors, which is called the Council of the Sub-regional Baltic Sea something states. I mean, a very, very long title of this organization, but it's quite interesting organization which perfectly fits into this framework and tries to address societal security problematic at the sub-regional, sub-state, or sub-national level.
Christina, please.
I mean, I'm going to answer your question about extremist populism. I'm just going to mention briefly that, I mean, also traditionally military organizations such as the NATO have come up with these 7 baseline requirements that have relate to resilience. So even traditionally, military organizations come to a realization nowadays that societal security matters is really at the base for any kind of security policy. So. And when it comes to populism, I mean, in Sweden we have a growing problem. We had a problem during the 90s for sure with extremist parties, and it's a growing problem today. Such as any actor in society, they too try to securitize their topics. I mean, I would say right now, if you want to position yourself in Sweden as an actor today, you want to securitize something. Pick something and securitize it, and you will have something of a platform, or join someone who securitizes something. If it's the environment or migration or, they're problematic with Russia, etc. So yes, it definitely affects the debate. Yeah.
Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, maybe another question. We still have a bit of time. Please introduce yourself, if you may.
Yeah. Christian Svanes from the Norwegian Embassy in Riga. I've looked through your book and listened also to your presentations, and what I see is quite interesting, the difference between the concept of societal security in the Baltics and to a degree in Russia, and also in the Nordic states. Whereas, especially Diana Pochomkina's presentation, she mentioned that she had these 3 main challenges and so on, but none of them are really connected to what happens if there's a disaster, what happens if there's a major forest fire, what happens if there's a landslide and a settlement is disconnected from the road network, for example. These are things we would talk more about in Norway, but that's also maybe more natural given the harsh weather conditions and definitely different geographical conditions. So my question is, to what extent is this kind of more safety-related issues on the discourse in the countries you come from?
So perhaps Christina? My apologies.
Yes, sorry. Petya Berzilska. Oh, yeah, okay. From IHS Country Risk. Sorry for the really basic question, but I wanted to ask, do you and how do you, if you do, differentiate between a nation and a society when you did your research? And also a second question, how would you assess the inclusion of minorities in the social dialogue, and do you see, when we talk about populists, they're exploiting a narrative. How do you see do you see minorities being a problem for the social dialogue in the future if they are not included in it?
Yes, my name is Signe Groza. I also have a question still relating to the concept, because we've seen all the different interpretations, how it's seen differently in different countries. So my question is societal security measurable? Can we have some criteria if we had to measure societal security in a certain society? What would be the criteria you would put to measure it?
Another one, perhaps? Okay, so very intense, I think very intense questions now. Perhaps then safety-related issues. Who would like to take the question?
I would say that during the past 20 years, safety has been a big issue in Sweden versus security that's now being reawakened. I would say that's the merge that's going on right now, is the safety and security trying to merge together in some way. When it comes to nation versus, I can take all the questions at once. When it comes to the nation versus society, I mean, in Sweden, it's difficult to separate. We're such a homogeneous country. The state and society and nation are very knit together in Sweden, and I think sometimes we tend to forget that this is not the case maybe in all countries, which is a very good reminder, I think. I don't recall really your question on minorities.
How are minorities included? But minorities?
Nation and society.
I mean, we do have a lot of quite some segregation, and certainly in the suburbs to the major cities, and there's an ongoing debate about this and how to integrate the immigrants that we've received from Syria, etc., and other nations. I mean, it's a socioeconomic problem in the end. Yes, it is being securitized, so to speak. We are discussing it, if we're handling it very well. I don't dare answering that question. How to measure societal security? I think this is this is the exact right question for me, because I'm working a lot on the floor with actors, trying to build real capability. So most of the time I spend quite some time away from theory. So I'm interested in, how do we know that we're doing something right? How do we know that we're safe, secure? How do they know that their actions actually, and the money that we spend on certain things, actually build capability of dealing with either natural disasters or an armed attack? I don't have a simple question to that. I think every actor has to put their security glasses on and do their own work. It cannot be done elsewhere. So everyone has to be a part of that and do their own criteria. And I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be possible for the EU or any other actor to do that from above. It needs to be done from within.
Okay. Safety, safety issues and societal security. From my point of view, it's two different things. Societal security is like high politics, and safety issues, it's low politics. When you are talking about practical problems, how to deal with issues like forest fire or other catastrophe. Just institutions, society should be ready, should be trained, should be prepared. It's more or less technical issues. And I think that then for societies which are making safety as a big political issue, that means that in these societies, societal security issues are already settled. And you could deal with safety and put on attention. And in other societies where societal issues are not enough settled, safety is not a first priority. But of course, it's not forgotten at all. Concerning nation and society, these two concepts and relations, in my case, in Lithuania, actually we don't. We have putting equal equal mark between these two things, because Lithuanian society is more or less homogeneous. Minorities are there are some problems, but more or less they are integrated, and they are not so numerous in order to produce problems. But in this regard, the problem is not so huge, and it's possible to solve these issues in a democratic political system. And concerning this issue, I would say that situation in Lithuania is very different from Latvian. Latvian situation is quite much more complicated. And the third question concerning is societal security measurable or not, I would answer yes and no. It depends how you operationalize the concept, or perhaps what is the main priority. If, for instance, in case of my country, the most burning issue is very high degree of immigration. So you could easily measure how many people are leaving country and how many people are coming back. But on the other hand, when you're talking, let's take Latvian example, when we have a huge Russian community, and there is a real problem how to develop identity of the country and how these communities could survive. It's about identity, and how you could measure identity, I don't know. No, it's not possible. It's just a process of construction.
I agree with Gediminas that safety is a bit different theme than societal security. As I mentioned in my presentation, for example, Russian neoliberalism, which is dominant paradigm in Russia, this paradigm tends to interpret societal security in terms of safety, public safety. And this is a very popular theme and a very important theme now in Russia, because over the recent years we had a lot of catastrophes, man-made or natural catastrophes, floods, forest fires, fires in trade malls or supermarkets, that kind of stuff, infrastructural problems. But it's different from the original meaning of societal security concept, which was done by the Copenhagen International Relations School, which actually, when it was introduced, it meant that they try to identify threats and challenges to the existential, vital problems of society. When the threats and challenges are very critical, when they threaten the very existence of the nation, of the society, when society could collapse or disappear, like, for example, as a result of migration, mass migration from the country, when influx of foreign migrants could increase critically, dramatically, and challenge the very identity of the society. That kind of issues are not relevant for Russia, for example, because we don't have any fundamental threats or challenges to the Russian society in that sense. No, demographic it's okay. We have ups and downs, but in general the trend is quite positive, and we overcome this the downfall of population or depopulation of Russia, which was in late 90s and early 2000s. There will be small depopulation in the forthcoming 10 years, but then it's again the prognosis are quite optimistic. No, that's not the problem. The second question about measuring or quantifying societal security or any kind of social processes, this is a very popular theme right now in the social sciences, and everyone tries to experiment in this area. I myself participate in a project funded by the United States National Science Foundation. It's led by George Washington University. It's a project about measuring the Arctic cities' sustainable development. And we developed a set of indicators which reflect different aspects of sustainability in these Arctic cities, not only Russian, but also American, Canadian, whatever. And this system of indicators covers everything from economic situation, technologies, society, social indicators, cultural indicators, identical things, even planning, whether they have a proper system of planning of sustainable development strategies, and so on. I think it's, it's the theme for the next project. And I guess it would be quite promising in the sense that it can combine theoretical and practical approaches. It could be of practical interest for many agencies, governmental agencies.
Exactly. This is not the first time we get the question on how do you measure societal security, and indeed a memo for the partners, and yeah, maybe the next project. Now, I think I'll have to wrap it up as we have approached the end, indeed, of a very intense discussion. Thank you once again all for coming. We are just on time. Thank you to the authors who made their time, their very busy schedules to come here to Riga. Now, I will not dare to somehow repeat what you said. I think that one of the things that we perhaps did not include in the conclusions, but that came to my attention was, once again, what Diana mentioned, that the regional agenda perhaps the regional agenda should one day also address the nation-building processes. And indeed, I think something that was very common and recurrent, both in the questions and answer session and in your presentations, is that more and more native solutions to boundary challenges are indeed feeding into these discussions on societal security. Now, I will leave it here. Thank you once again. I invite you all to a coffee break just around there for more discussions.